9. The Savior Returns. Written by Celestial Rainstorm. Narrated by AJ the Elementalgod. Chapter 19. Devastation. The morning dawned. Inside the quiet lobby, the clan all gathered in a circle. When we get into the Citadel, one of us will have to lure the machine beast away from the machine, 9 said, standing at the head of the circle. While the fabrication machine is alone, one of us will allow it to see us. It shuts down before it kills, so we might have a split-second advantage to get the talisman. It'll be dangerous, but we can do it. After we get the talisman back, the machine beast will split its heart. Once it's cut in half, we can kill the machine beast, and then the machine. He finished. They all nodded in silent agreement. 5 and I were tinkering last night, 2 said to the others, and we thought this might be useful. He held out a very particularly shaped object. It resembled the light staff in some ways. It had a long handle and the light perched on the top. 2 aimed it at a book cover. He pulled back what appeared to be a handle. The cover over the light was pulled back, and a silhouette appeared on the book. A red flashing light illuminated the room, the exact color of the eye of the machines. The entire clan jumped, startled, and the twins rushed to hide behind 9. 2 quickly shut off the device, the crimson light replaced by a gray of dawn. Everyone stood frozen, staring at the 2 inventors in perplexity. 2 beamed, happy the device had worked. 5 was really the one who figured this out, and he scavenged all of these parts. I just constructed this device. The light makes it appear as if one of us is being cornered. The machine beast believes it found one of us. It will lure it away long enough to retrieve the talisman. 5 thought of the design. He recalled when you 2 constructed your staff. 9. He even finished it last night when I was too tired to carry on. He added affectionately, as if a father praising his son. 5 bent his head and mumbled something that sounded like, he's exaggerating. Excellent. 2 and 5, this'll help a lot, 9 said, patting the old inventor on the back, while the twins peered curiously out from behind him. All right, now we need to move soon, if we want to surprise them, he said, gesturing to the destroyed world outside. Turning, the clan walked out into the dark emptiness, traveling in a crooked line. Each six-point kept a keen eye out for their hunters. There's the Citadel, 5 said, pointing to the clock tower, towering high above their heads. Around 5 miles away or so. 9 nodded. Come on, this way, he said softly to the group, and they followed him. 1 paused for a moment, very bitter and angry. Even 8 was following the neophyte. Ever since that boy had come, his authority had been questioned. However, he couldn't make a point of it now, since he didn't know how to get to the Citadel, grumbling furiously to himself. 1 reluctantly followed the younger man. The group walked slowly and silently across the emptiness, listening for the machines. They could easily hear the distant thunder, rumbling through the clouds way off near the mountains. But no monsters. 9 felt very uneasy, as if something was going to happen. He adjusted his grip of his lightstaff, ready to grab his blade in a millisecond if needed. He felt his hands trembling as his eyes scanned the area around him, trying to spot any of the machines. Nevertheless, it was all eerily quiet. The only sound of the morning were the whistling of the wind and their footsteps upon the cold, hard ground. 9 suddenly felt a hand upon his, and he jumped startled. He turned only to find that it was 7, clutching his hand tightly, reassuringly seeing his uneasiness. "Easy," she told him softly, and he nodded, trying to stop the shaking of his hand. 7 gripped his hand tighter, then releasing it. Her eyes peered out from the shadowy sockets of the skullmet, scanning the world around her. 7 calmed down a bit, still nervous. They continued on, the time passing slowly like sand through an hourglass. Nothing appeared, and though he remained alert, 9 allowed himself to deeper breath. "They must have lost us," 5 murmured as he walked next to 9, wrinkling his hands nervously. 9's brows furrowed, slowing his pace. 5 was right. There was no sign of the machines now. Nonetheless, slightly doubtful, 9 continued to lead the group to the Citadel. Suddenly, he heard the all-too-familiar groan of metallic joints. A flash of red out of the corner of his eye. A soft snarl. "Wait! Wait!" he whispered fiercely, holding out a hand to the group, listening to the air intensely for the sound once more. "What is it?" one demanded, his cape covering his arms, his body slightly trembling from the cold. 8 grunted in agreement. "Hush!" 7 snapped at him, and the other 8 rag dolls listened for what startled 9. He glanced into a small cave nestling between the base of the tree and a large boulder, trying to see if it was hiding in there. A roar then echoed through the emptiness, reverberating off the hills and finally languishing. Everyone looked up in horror at the all-too-familiar noise. Everything felt silent once more, the air filled with unbearable tension. A rock cluttered down the hillside. The group whirled around at the noise. It was here. It must be. Knowing they couldn't let themselves be cornered, 9 gently eased them away from the hillside, nudging them with the light staff. They could feel that the monster was close. But where was it? The spy machine was quick and silent with its prey, like a lion zoning in on its target. It crouched down and climbed to the top of a large boulder. Stealthily, it loaded a harpoon in its chest. Despite its injured eye, it was still able to aim for the ragdolls closest to it. 9. The spring lock pulled back. A razor-sharp arrow aimed for 9 right between his shoulder blades. Hearing the familiar metallical noise of the spring lock, 5 rolled around to see the spy machine about to shoot his friend. "9, behind you!" 5 cried. 9 rolled around just as the arrow was shot. It glided past his chest, the tip barely skimming his zipper. Falling back, he looked up to see the spy machine racing for them, snarling. "Run! Get into the cave!" 9 ordered, tossing his staff to 5 and gesturing in the direction of the hollow nestled between the snarling tree roots and the rock. Without hesitation, 9 whirled back around and rushed towards the spy machine. It was completely locked on him, determined to kill the little nuisance. His heart pounding as the machine tore towards him, opening the razor-toothed jaws. Gathering his courage, 9 thrusted his blade forward, straight into the machine's injured eye. Tiny sparks of glass flew everywhere as the eye shattered completely. The red light flickered out. Sparks exploded from the eye as 9 dove underneath the monster while it was distracted with pain. He ran desperately towards the cavern, while its back was turned. The machine shrieked, shaking its head and snarling in agitation. 9 raced into the cave, nearly colliding with the back wall. Collapsing, he closed his eyes, panting hard, his heart beating fast. His distraction had worked. Someone clutched his arm tightly. You stupid man, you were almost killed, 7 hissed in his hearing sensor, and she gripped tightly on his arm. He shook his head, leaning back and still trying to catch his breath. They all remained quiet as the spy machine looked for them, snarling and roaring in frustration. They all cringed as they heard the sniffing of the machine through its hollow nostrils, trying to find them. 9 heard 7 whimper in fright. 7's fingers tightened around his arm, and he felt her press herself closer to him. Her breathing trembled. 5 huddled next to him, his whole body shaking. 9 wished he could somehow tell them it was going to be all right, but he dare not speak. Finally, there was a sound of metallic paws against the ground as the machine retreated. Everybody relaxed and looked up, peering through the darkness, trying to see in the pathetic light that streamed through the opening. It's gone. 5 breathed in relief, slumping against the rock behind him. There was a collective sigh of relief around 9, and he too allowed himself to relax. He felt 7's grip lacken as she looked up at him. He gave her a weak smile, which slowly slid off his face as he heard a springing noise. His head snapped up, and he knew what was going to happen before he did. "Everyone, get back!" He shouted at them, pushing whoever his hands could find towards the back of the cavern. Claws of the monster proceeded its teeth as it destroyed the cavern with its strong front legs, stabbing through the ancient roots like paper. Light suddenly streamed in, causing 9 to blink rapidly, temporarily blinded. The spy machine snarled and lashed out, trying to grab anybody it could. Panic ensued as the stitchpunks all scrambled around, trying to get out around the machine. It trapped them in the cave, making this so much easier. It raised its head, and everything seemed slow in motion as 9 watched the razor teeth fly through the air, right towards 7. 9 reached out on impulse that even he could not explain. He pushed himself off the ground, extending his hands and shoving 7 as much force as he could muster. She stumbled and landed in 5's arms. The teeth instead clamped down on 9. He cried out as the fangs sunk into his side. He felt himself ripped away from the others, and the spy machine released him from its jaws. 9 felt his chest constricted as the wind bit painfully on his skin. He was unable to scream, unable to breathe. He went flying through the air and crashed into a gigantic metallic weapon on the top of the hill. Propped against a tree, he landed on a heap beside the old weapon. It was obviously handmade by someone who was in the resistance, a rusted razor-edged saw blade, mounted on a spiraling tree branch with barbed wire. I tried to get up and stumbled forward, feeling the ground. His vision doubled as he shook his head, struggling to stay awake. He was so dazed that he couldn't get to his feet underneath him. Suddenly the spy machine appeared behind him. It snarled viciously, standing tall as a light suddenly filled the air, accompanied by a sickening, sharp, crackling sound. Snapped out of his daze, and I looked up to see the line of pure electricity trailing from between the machine's horns down to the tip of his tail. It was the exact color of the orb, crackling and sizzling. The stitchpunks gasped, rushing to his feet and trying to run past the monster. Extending one claw almost lazily, it jabbed the tip of 9's side. A line of electricity shot from his arm through its claw and shocked 9 hard. He cried out and fell to the ground, feeling a tight pain shoot up from his spine through his electrical nerves. Stunned, he tried to get to his feet again before he felt the claws close around his chest. 9 cried out, struggling to break free. He wasn't going down now. He needed to somehow get out of this. get back to the others. The spy machine snarled, furious. This piece of the scientist's soul was indeed a fighter, but it had escaped the machine's grasp one too many times. Raising its claw around about its head, the machine threw 9 into the saw blade. The razor-sharp edge, thin and cold as ice, was stabbing into his side. 9 was unable to contain his scream of pain. The blade ripped easily through his burlap skin, scraping against metals and wires deep within him. 9 fought to brace himself, struggling to pry himself off the blade. The machine suddenly leaped towards the weapon. It flung towards the struggling Stitchpunk and locked its jaw around 9's wrist, wincing him forward and dragging the blade down his entire left side. An unimaginable pain shearing through his body. 9 had never felt a pain like this. Every thought was washed away, replaced with burning agony, spreading throughout him like a scorching fire. His entire body felt weakened and consumed by a pain. Screams ripped through his throat as he struggled to free himself from the monster's grip. "Hey! Over here!" a voice yelled as a crossbow arrow struck the spy machine's shoulder. It shrieked in pain and looked over to see 5, loading his crossbow again, ready to strike. The machine let go of 9, who fell to the ground, as it pounced for 5 instead, who gave a shout, and turned to flee. 7 immediately rushed to 9, who was lying limply in the cold earth. The tip of the rusted blade had broken off, and was now protruding from his side. Small sparks flew from the tear in his side. Heaving with each halted breath, he was struggling to stay awake, to fight off the pain coursing through his body. Everything was dark, muted. He could barely breathe, barely think. 7 shook his shoulders desperately, trying to get him to open his eyes. 9 slowly opened his eyes and looked up at her wearily, her blurred shape bending close to him. "Come on, 9, stay awake! Stay awake!" she told him firmly. He merely looked up at her, his mind slowly processing her words. He could barely hear her voice going in and out of focus. He slowly reached up and grasped her arm, trying to hold onto something to keep him from losing consciousness. "Okay, 9, stay with me. It's going to hurt for a minute," 7 said urgently, bending over him. She couldn't move him with the metal lodged into his side, and he needed to get it out of here now, grasping it tightly, horrified that she was about to seriously hurt her friend. 7 jerked it back and freed the blade from 9's body. He shrieked, writhing in agony. She threw the blade away and, grasping 9's shoulders, bending him close. "Stay awake, 9, stay with me. Come on, get up. We gotta move." She was yelling now, trying to pull him into a standing position. He struggled to his feet, clutching the rip on his side. He finally fought off the unconsciousness for the time being, knowing that his friends were in danger. 7 grasped his shoulders and tried to help him walk the small hill. He took the step, but he couldn't take the pain and collapsed. Took a step and collapsed again. "Get him!" a voice commanded from what seemed like above his head. It surprised him that it wasn't 7, 5, or even 2 that gave the command. It was 1. Suddenly, a large muscular arm scooped him up from the ground as if he didn't weigh anything. "Foolish, stupid boy." One's voice ranged besides the running 8, but 9 couldn't see him. "Stupid kid." 8 repeated the comment from directly above 9. He couldn't find the strength to lift his head up to see where the voices were. The spy machine snarled and hissed as they began to run from it, over the rubble and across the Badlands, as fast as their legs could carry them. Where they were headed looked like an old battlefield. There were ruts in earth and hills from some leafless trees in the distance. The ground was flat, rocky plate. Dead bodies were strewn across the area. Human bodies. still clad in their armor uniforms, guns clutched in their cold hands, their mouths agape and their stare glassy. In the distance was the large motor, the types of humans once used, crumbled wooded crate beside them. Nine looked at it, quickly forming an idea. He struggled out of 8's arms, still clutching his injury. "Get to that! All distracted!" 9 cried, waving him onwards to fire to the field gun. His stance unstable. 7 and 5 standing side by side, staring at him, but then relented and ran towards the motor. While they ran to the cannon, reluctant to leave him behind, 9 turned and faced the machine. It eventually caught up to him. It snarled and opened its jaws, but 9 threw himself into the dust, sliding underneath the machine. He stayed underneath it while it was screeching in anger and tried to either crush him under his claws or snap him up with its jaws, but it wasn't able to. 9 continued to try to stay underneath the machine where it couldn't grab him, distracting it, the pain swirling throughout his body, and he cringed, biting his lower lip. Then suddenly the machine shrieked a horrible sound. 9 pressed his hand to his side of his head, grimacing in the noise as a missile clipped the side of the machine. The entire group was working the cannon. 8 was stiffing the missiles into the barrel of the gun. The twins, 2, 6, and 5, handing them to him. 7 working the barrel of the gun, and 1 was firing them to the machine in the distance, purely in his element. It clasped into the dust, nearly on top of 9, before he managed to leap out of the way. The spy machine struggled to recover itself. 9 ran towards the cannon. Each step caused him excruciatingly searing pain that drained away his soul, quickly and painfully. As he neared the cannon, he began to stumble. "Don't kill it! We need its heart for the machine!" he cried breathlessly as he approached them. Finally collapsed into the dust. He clutched the tear of his side, the pain blinding him. 5 immediately leapt from the gun and down to him. He slipped his arm underneath 9, trying to support him without hurting him. He looked absolutely horrified as he brushed his fingertips over the huge tear on his side. 5 turned and dug furiously through his pack. 9 lay on the ground, struggling to fight the darkness. The spy machine shrieked as another bullet caused it to fall again, as it collided with its foot, momentarily paralyzing it. 5 then brought out a tiny roll of white medical tape. Knowing there was not enough time to heal 9, supporting the injured man with one arm, he wrapped the white tape gently across the middle, covering most of the rip. At least it covered the wound, and the gash wouldn't tear further. Once he was finished, 5 leapt to his feet, whipping out his crossbow. 9 looked up and reached for him desperately. "5, no!" 7 suddenly appeared at 5's side, pushing him down with the hilt of her spear. "Stay here and stay down, 5. Watch over him," 7 said as the last missile went soaring across the sky. It missed the machine by an inch. Stunning the ammo was aimed. The machine easily dodged it. The ability to learn was not wasted on the terrifying creature. 7. 9 began trying to get to his feet. She pushed firmly on the injured ragdoll's chest as he collapsed once more, unable to rise to his feet and clutching his side. His face twisted in intense pain. 5 seized his wrist before looking worriedly up at 7. "If we injure it enough, it will just go away. Then we have a chance," she said before knocking down her skullmet and rushing to the machine, spear raised high. It was turned around, trying to chase the others off of the cannon, clawing madly. 7 raised her spear over her head, attempting to pierce its back, but it suddenly turned around and managed to clip her side, sending her to the ground. "All right," she said, blowing one of the feathers out of her eye, her brows furrowed in annoyance. "Let's try that again, shall we?" She got to her feet, staring hard at the back of the spy machine. The warrior within her roared, driving her forward. It had hurt her friend, and this was ending now. "Let's dance," she hissed before rushing it. She jumped soaring into the air and tried to pierce its heavily armored back once again. However, it suddenly whipped around, and the long tail collided into her. Seven was sent sailing through the air, and she landed painfully on her back, a few yards away. She lay for a moment, winded, unable to get back up. Nine attempted to get to his feet as he saw this, pushing 5 away from him. The pain seared. But now one of his best friends was in danger, and he didn't care. He had just enough strength to get to his feet, but the older Stitchpunk pushed him back down to the ground. "Stay here, 9," he told 9 as he ran to the spy machine, crossbow in hand. 5 felt his reckless bravery overtake him as he watched 7 fall. With swift, experienced hand, he loaded his bow and aimed for the joint of the machine's right front leg. It snarled at him as the arrow whistled through the air and lodged itself into the forelimb joint of the machine. It shrieked in pain and lunged for 5. He gave a terrifying cry as he tried to back away from it, then turned and tried to run away. It easily followed him and swung its claws through the air, tripping 5. The Stitchpunk went plummeting into the dirt, landing on his back with a grunt. The machine loaded an arrow in its chest. 5 scrambled to his feet, running back towards the others as fast as he possibly could. However, it wasn't fast enough. The machine shot the arrow from its chest, the weapon cutting through the air and flew by 5, impaling him in the arm. He gave a scream in pain as he was slammed against the ground, the arrow ripping easily through him. "No! No! No!" he cried in fright, trying to pull himself free from the arrow. It had pinned him into the ground, making escape impossible. The spy machine towered over him, snarling triumphantly. It then leaned down, snapping him up in its jaws and tossing him into a cage mounted upon its body. It quickly locked him inside and began to bound away towards the Citadel. Its injured forearm was held aloft, its prey inside crying out in fright at the top of his voice. "No! 5! No! No!" 9 screamed, jumping to his feet. He wasn't going to lose 5, no matter how injured he was. He already lost his best friend once. He was never going to let it happen again. He managed to catch up to the retreating machine and leapt. He grabbed onto the underside of the ribcage, clenching its jaw as he fought through the pain. Using the momentum of the running monster, he swung his legs up and hooked his feet on the underside of its ribcage, heaving himself up, clinging to the metal bars. He retracted through the bars for 5, the older Stitchpunk struggling to stand and reach back for 9. Tightening his grip on the bar, he strained, trying to reach his friend. Their fingertips nearly touched. He had to get 5 out of there. He couldn't lose him. The spy machine screeched to a halt, sending a cloud of dirt and dust in the air. The 2 Stitchpunks jolted forward, 9 losing his balance and being thrown from the cage. He managed to grasp the edge of the rib cage and hung down, padding heavily. Suddenly, before he could do a thing, the machine's huge head swung down and latched onto his ankle. It pulled 9 away from 5, the younger ragdoll having no strength to hang on. It swung its head around, tossing him to the ground. 9 cried out as he landed on his chest. He knew he had to fight no matter what happened, but it was weakening by the second. He could hardly move. The spy machine was infuriated. This little being had been ruining the Master's takeover since it had been repaired and brought back to life. Though the Master would be displeased to lose one of its souls it was so ravenous for, the little nuisance needed getting rid of. It had put up a fight, but it was time to end this. The machine easily scooped 9 up in its razor-edged claws. He struggled to free himself. He had to get out of this. He had to get back to the others and save 5. He couldn't go down now. A bright, blinding blue light of the electrical electrical current traveling through the spines of the monster, shooting down his arm, into each claw, and onto 9. He was helpless to do anything as the searing, unbearable pain suddenly surged through him. Every nerve in his body was coated in fire. His chest tightened so hard he couldn't breathe. It felt as if 1,000 white-hot needles was running through him at the same time. Every artificial muscle he had constricted so tightly he felt as he might snap in half. He couldn't fight the darkness any longer. It grabbed him and pulled him under overwhelmingly quickly. Last thing 9 felt before everything went black was a jump of his heart. And then it stopped as the electric current abruptly ceased. He didn't feel the spy machine through his limp, mangled body. All was gone before he crashed into a pile of splintering wooden boards. The spy machine gave a triumphant snort and saw the dust cloud rise over the small, obviously dead body. It turned away, racing back to the Citadel with its prey locked securely in his chest. 5 was clutching his injured arm, reaching for the lifeless friend through the bars of the machine's ribcage. "No! 9! No, 9!" he cried before the machine was out of sight. "5! No!" 7 cried, but she tried to run after the machine and attempt to save 5. 2 grasped her shoulders as he raced by him. He held her to a spot tightly, stopping her, although every instinct in her told her that she must go after 5. She knew she could do 2 no harm. 7, you can't go alone. Please come with me. There's another urgent matter, he said shakily, tugging onto her shoulder gently. She didn't look at him, but stared intently at the place where the machine and 5 had disappeared. Her breathing was ragged, and everything on earth seemed to pull her towards the Citadel. 5 is a strong man. Please, 7. 2 tried to console her, voice straining, turned around. She saw the dust rise from the pile of wood where 9 had landed, after she had watched him being violently electrocuted. 9, she said softly before finally wrenching herself out of 2's grasp. She ran for the gun, her heart lurching as she saw what looked like a pile of ragged burlap barely visible through the dust. She immediately leapt onto the remains of the crate and began to lift the large pieces of lumber, breathing heavily as she did so, throwing them over her shoulder. 2 helped her dig through the splinters, desperately searching for the younger Stitchpunk. Finally, she managed to uncover him. 9 lay on his side, unmoving and silent, his eyes closed. 7 wrapped her arms around the torso, trying to drag him out of under the wood. Without anyone saying a word, the timid 6 hurried forward. His breathing trembled as she joined 7, grabbing 9's legs, the 2 guiding them to the ground away from the splinters. As the 2 gently sat him down to lie on his back, 7's heart lurched as she saw that he was injured horrendously. It looked like he was giving up the fight and had to let go of everything, had succumbed to forever darkness. 9, can you hear me? 2 said, bending next to him, eyes wide in fear, the old man trembling with fright. Stay with us, lad. 7 bent as well as 6, hesitantly stepping away, unsure of what he was to do. She pressed her cheek to his chest, listening desperately for his heartbeat. There was none. She lurched back, shaking her head slightly. He couldn't be gone. Not after all he fought through. Taking his shoulders, she shook him hard, trying to wake him. She only made his head fall lifelessly onto the side. 7 bent down closer to him, while the others watched in horror. 9, wake up now. Come on. You've got to breathe. You can't die. Do you hear me? You can't die. You can't give up. Wake up, she told him, the strength in her voice dissolving into a desperate strain. Despite her demands, 9 remained unresolved. 7 reached down and took his hand, squeezing tightly. He couldn't have slipped away. He couldn't be gone. Not now. "Please," Seven whispered. Lowering lip trembled. Suddenly, there was a small spark from between his fingers. The young woman jumped slightly. With a gasp, a small current had passed from Nine's hand into Seven's, her own metal fingers sending right back to him. His body suddenly gave a jolt, as his heart leapt, starting once again. Seven jumped with a gasp, holding Nine's hand tightly as he gasped, coming back from the brink. He trembled violently, crying in pain. The poor young man's back arched off the ground, his cries filling the air around him. Seven knew he was in excruciating agony, and tried soothingly to calm him. She unraveled the shredded tape from his body, examining the injury. From the crook of his arm down his side to the side of his knee, he was torn completely open. Some of the metal ribcage of his hip structure showed through the protective padding underneath the burlap of his chest and body. Two of his ribs were bent at strange angles, and indecently they were broken. However, she knew his wounds reached deep inside of his body. It was a terrible scene, and her hand went unconsciously to her mouth in horror. Two came forward to examine the injury with great dismay in his face. "Two, is he going to be okay?" Seven demanded, leaning towards the old inventor. Her brows furrowed. She kept her hands on Nine, who was now lying silently grimacing. His fingers curled into his fists and uncurling again repeatedly. It's too early to say, but I do know that if we don't treat him now soon, we will lose him," he said gravely, the worry emanating from his voice. "It's been a long time since I've seen an injury like this severe." Seven felt as if the entire world was slowly spinning to an end as she looked down at Nine. "We must get him to a safe place," Two said softly as he wrapped the tape around Nine once more to cover the wound. Seven nodded carefully. She took his arm and held it over her shoulders and eased him up. She gave a soft grunt of pain as she stood. The sound caused Seven some relief in knowing that he was still alive. She took his full weight on her, but she didn't care. Her first priority was getting him to a safe place. "Come, we must hide," one said gravely, his eyes flickering to Nine silently, shredded from the length of a heartbeat, then quickly looking away. Nobody argued with the old stitch punk, and others followed him as he began to lead them to the shelter. Seven lagged behind the group slightly. "You'll be okay. Just hang on," she told Nine softly, firmly, although she knew fully well he was still unconscious. Seven fixed her eyes on the path ahead. She had tightened around his waist as she moved. One led them to the boarding house, while 5 was taken to the Citadel. End of chapter 19.